So, I've been really into lifting for quite a while now. I started back in 2018 when I was a senior in high school and kept it up all throughout my college years and into the present. The only problem was during this time I had actual responsibilities. I was always allocating my gym time whenever I didn't have class, project work, etc. But after I graduated, I had this magical window before starting work of pure freedom and absolutely no responsibilities or schedule to adhere to. And while most people in my position might go backpacking in Europe or discover enlightenment in a Buddhist monastery or something, I was just more concerned with maximizing my pump. I'd always gone to the gym in the mornings before class, but now that the world was my oyster, I began to wonder what life was like on the other side of the fence. A lot of people go to the gym in the early evening after work, some during their lunch break, and a few psychopaths go at 2 a.m. And I started to ask myself, what was their experience like and how did it differ from my own? Were some of these people training at more optimal times than others? And if so, could we find a way to quantify it? What if we could even create an algorithm to calculate the best time to lift? In this video, we're going to attempt to answer all these questions by combining an unholy trinity of math, science, and being a gym rat. Let's get into it. You ever notice how your energy seems to ebb and flow throughout the day? Like sometimes you're wide awake, full of energy and ready to take on the world, and other times you can barely keep your eyes open. Part of this could definitely just be the coffee or lack of sleep, but there's also something deeper at play here. Our bodies are wired to follow a natural rhythm, one that's been evolving for millions of years. And this rhythm does a lot more than just tell us when to sleep, it's also a key player in determining when we're at our physical best. The first and probably most important factor in finding an optimal time to exercise is our circadian rhythm. Derived from the Latin word circa, about, and diem, day, or about a day, our circadian rhythm is the 24-hour cycle that regulates our sleep-wake patterns. It's kind of like an internal clock that's constantly ticking, quietly keeping track of all the cues around us, like light streaming into the window, the cup of coffee you had at noon, and even the workout that you squeezed in last night. All of this information is processed to regulate numerous internal functions, from determining when we feel sleepy or alert, to signaling the release of hormones, burning fat, or adjusting body temperature. And that last one, our body temperature, is what we're particularly interested in. Over the course of the day, our core body temperature fluctuates by about 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet this seemingly trivial variation has significant impacts on athletic performance. Various studies have shown that peak body temperature correlates with increased strength, power output, and overall athletic performance. This is pretty much why we warm up before working out. We are literally elevating our body temperature in order to improve performance. Studies indicate that our body temperature is typically lowest in the early morning, rises throughout the day, and peaks in the late afternoon before beginning to drop off again. This effect can be hard to see in real-world competitions though, as the majority of athletic events are scheduled in the early afternoon or late evening purely just based for broadcasting reasons. But there's one massive exception to this rule, and it just so happens to take place on the highest possible stage for athletes. When a country is selected to host the Olympics, they will sometimes adjust the race times to accommodate prime broadcasting times in other continents. As a result, athletes end up competing in all sorts of unusual times. This provides us with the perfect opportunity to observe how time of day affects performance by comparing average race finish times throughout the day. We'll be analyzing data from swimming competitions in particular, since the events are held indoors and the temperature of the water is mandated to be between 25 to 28 degrees Celsius. This is ideal because it effectively controls for external temperature differences for us. In the study, researchers began by grouping athletic performances into 4 distinct clusters, each measured at different times of the day. From there, they calculated the average performance within each cluster, which gave them the 4 key data points you see on the right-hand graph. With these points in place, they were able to fit a sine wave that allowed them to estimate athletic performance at any time of the day. According to this model, performance hits its peak around 5:12 p.m. in the late afternoon and dips to its lowest point around 5:12 a.m. in the early morning. And if this sounds familiar, it's because this sine wave mirrors the exact same pattern as our core body temperature throughout the day. And this time of day effect isn't insignificant either. In 40% of Olympic swimming finals, the difference in performance between times of day was larger than the margin between gold and silver medalists. In other words, failing to adjust your circadian rhythm to the race time could literally be the difference between standing on the podium or not. Olympic coaches began recognizing the significance of this phenomenon decades ago, and as a result, athletes undergo strict routine adjustments to shift their internal clocks. These adjustments include shifting sleep schedules, meal times, and even controlling light exposure just to trick the body into believing it's a different time of day. It's kind of like how you can get a pet bird to fall asleep just by covering their cage. The body responds to environmental cues, even if it's not really night. There is a slight catch though, in that it's that these temperature peaks aren't a one-size-fits-all. They kind of vary from person to person. That's where the concept of chronotypes comes into play. Your chronotype dictates your natural sleep-wake cycle, whether you're an early bird, night owl, or somewhere in between. This in turn influences when your body temperature peaks during the day, and knowing when that peak hits is crucial for figuring out our optimal gym time. One way to find out your chronotype is the Morningness Eveningness Questionnaire, or MEQ. Developed by two European researchers in the 1970s, the MEQ asks about your sleep habits to determine where you fall on the morning-evening spectrum. It's become the de facto way to measure chronotype, having been professionally cited over 4,000 times in academic research. When I took the test, I found out that I'm an intermediate type, meaning I tend to normally wake up at around 8:30 a.m. naturally. I'll include a link if you want to try this out yourself, but you can honestly probably guess which category you fall into, as there's only 5 of them. But now that we know our chronotype, we can make an educated guess about our temperature peak. While direct studies on this are still developing, we can estimate the peak using a quasi-experimental study that measured the minimum core body temperatures of morning and evening chronotypes. We discovered earlier that body temperature follows a sine wave pattern with a roughly 12-hour gap between the peak and trough. So if we know when our body hits its minimum temperature, we can simply add 12 hours to find our temperature peak or maximum temperature. The study found that the minimum core body temperatures for morning types occurred at 5:13 a.m., while for evening types it was 7:28 a.m. The only issue is that the study only measured these two extremes, morning and evening types, without accounting for the chronotypes in between. To address this, we took the time difference between the morning and evening minimum temperatures, divided the range into equal intervals, and used that to estimate the minimum temperatures for the intermediate chronotypes. Once we knew the minimum, we simply flipped the time to PM to estimate the peak, 12 hours later. Now we have a rough estimate of each chronotype's peak body temperature timing. For instance, as an intermediate type, my temperature peak hits at around 6:21 PM. The further we move away from this peak in either direction, the lower our body temperature and performance gets. Okay, so we have a graph of the model, but how do we quantify it? We need a way to score different points along the curve. We know that the peak will have the highest score and the trough the lowest, but how do we handle all the points in between? The answer is actually pretty simple thanks to this guy. Fortunately for us, the Gaussian distribution, or bell curve as it's most commonly known as, looks strikingly similar to a sine wave. Like the sine wave, the bell curve rises and falls smoothly, showing how performance peaks are most likely near the early afternoon, with fewer happening the further you stray from it. To assign scores, we'll use something called a probability density function, or PDF, of the bell curve. The PDF helps us calculate the probability of different outcomes at each point along the curve, with higher probabilities near the peak and lower ones near the trough. For our purposes, we're just going to be relabeling these probabilities into scores. This will give us a continuous distribution of scores that match the shape of the curve. And with that, we've added the first feature to our algorithm. By syncing our gym time with our body's natural temperature peak, we can maximize performance and recovery. This feature sets the foundation for finding our optimal workout time. Next, we'll explore a second key factor to further refine our algorithm. Caffeine has been a staple of Western culture for centuries and in the East for millennium. However, its use in enhancing athletic performance is actually relatively new, gaining momentum in the late 20th century and absolutely exploding in popularity over the past decade. These days, energy drinks and pre-workout supplements are so widespread that it's rare to see someone not drinking caffeine before workouts. This really isn't surprising. There's a plethora of research supporting caffeine's benefits like increased alertness, enhanced endurance, and higher adrenaline levels. With so many perks, it seems like a no-brainer to drink caffeine before exercising. But there is a big catch. Caffeine doesn't actually give you energy. Instead, it works by blocking adenosine, the hormone that makes you feel sleepy. Its effects peak between 30 minutes to an hour after consumption, which makes it great for pre-workout energy. However, caffeine has a half-life of about 5 hours, meaning that 5 hours after consumption, half of it is still in your system. After 10 hours, 25% of it still remains, and it takes a full 24 hours to clear all of it from your system. The long half-life becomes a problem if you drink caffeine late in the day, as it can mess with your sleep and recovery. To avoid this, we want to aim to have caffeine soon after waking up, so your body has time to process it before bedtime. Caffeine's half-life also means we can't model its effect linearly, like with a drug like alcohol. We need an exponential decay model, where the largest drop-off happens in the first half-life cycle, with smaller decreases after that. Now, there's one problem with this model though. The x-axis is an hour since consuming caffeine. In order to keep it in line with the other features, we need to shift this to a 24-hour scale. But this raises another question. What time should we start at? In our model, the earlier you drink caffeine, the less likely you'll disrupt your sleep and the higher your score will be. Here, it assumes everyone's waking up at the witching hour, which probably isn't realistic. To fix this, we'll shift the x-axis to start at each user's actual wake-up time. This will introduce another variable into our equation, but it's a necessary one. It should also be noted that some people, like Andrew Huberman, suggest waiting an hour to consume caffeine after waking up to avoid a midday crash. The idea is that natural cortisol levels are highest in the morning right after waking up, and caffeine can interfere with that. Ultimately though, the science on this isn't conclusive, and since I'm not a biology expert, I chose not to factor this into my algorithm. If you want to subscribe to this theory though, you can just shift the curve about 30 minutes to an hour later. We can once again score each point along the curve by using the PDF, though this one will look quite different from the previous one because it's based on a different function. By factoring in caffeine timing, our algorithm now captures both its highs and lows. Energy drinks and pre-workout supplements can definitely add some extra oomph to your workouts, but drink them too late and they can mess with your sleep, thus stunting both your recovery and growth. And now that we've got caffeine sorted, we can finally move on to the last piece of our algorithm. For the last component of my model, I wanted to consider something a little less scientific: crowds. I'm usually a pretty patient person, but that goes out the window when I step into a gym. Maybe it's the caffeine or the hormones coursing through my body, but I hate waiting for a squat rack. I still have nightmares about the literal lines that would form in front of a bench during peak hours at my school gym. I wanted to account for gym crowdedness in my algorithm because it can potentially make or break a workout. If your usual 1 hour session takes 2 hours because you're stuck waiting for equipment, it's probably not going to be your best workout. But to do this, I needed data on past gym crowd density to train the model. But as you might guess, most public gyms don't really post this information for others to analyze. Google Maps does a decent job, but it only gives hourly estimates and doesn't give that data for free. So when big tech let me down, I had to find another source with access to large datasets. So I found the next best thing: the government, or more specifically, public universities. It turns out a student at UC Berkeley tracked the number of people in their campus gym every 10 minutes for a year, resulting in over 62,000 unique data samples. The school's computers kept track of this, by the way. He didn't just sit around with a pair of binoculars, if that's what you were thinking. But this dataset is exactly what we're looking for, as it's large enough to infer gym crowdedness by just looking at historical trends. The data was really well organized, so I really didn't have to do much cleaning. The only thing I adjusted was filtering out the non-semester data, since the gym is unusually empty during breaks because all the kids are at home. After that, I plotted the average number of people in the gym for each hour of the day, broken down by the day of the week. Looking at the data, the first thing we can confirm is what you'd expect. Weekday evenings from 5 to 8 p.m. are by far the busiest. On weekends, the peak is less pronounced, with a steady flow from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. There were quite a few quirks in the data though. First, even during peak times, the gym wasn't that crowded. The max number of people recorded was 145, but on average, it really wasn't that busy. I don't know about you guys, but my local gym has way more than 60 people at 6 p.m. on a Monday, so this was really surprising. The second quirk was just how busy the gym was on Friday evenings. Most commercial gyms I've been in are deserted at 8 p.m. on a Friday because everyone's going out. Berkeley students seem to take no days off. Although, when I was in college, a lot of people would try to get a pump in before going out, so maybe this does make sense. Lastly, the gym was relatively empty on Saturday and Sunday mornings. In my experience, the busiest times on the weekend are around 9 to 11 a.m., but here there's no such peak. But again, college students are often sleeping off their hangovers from the night before, so this also tracks. So there are definitely a few limitations with this data set. College students live very different lives than the rest of us, but it still gives us a pretty solid way to generalize gym crowdedness. And unlike the previous two features, we don't even need to use a PDF here because we already have scores based on the number of people in the gym. But since we want to give higher scores to less crowded times, we can create a new curve that's the inverse of the crowdedness curve. This new curve, the crowdedness score curve, will give the lowest scores to busier times and the highest scores to emptier times. And that's our final feature done. Factored in gym crowds rounds out the model by accounting for time efficiency and gym experience in addition to the more science-based features before it. We now have all the features in place and are ready to combine them into a single equation to finish this once and for all. We've done most of the hard work and we're almost at the finish line. There are just two more things to address: normalizing the curves so they're measured on the same scale, and determining how much weight to give to each feature in our overall score. And spoiler alert, one of these is way easier than the other. For those unfamiliar, normalizing data just means adjusting the values measured on different scales to a common scale. This helps ensure no single variable dominates the analysis because of its units or magnitude. We're going to use min-max normalization scaling, which adjusts the lowest value to 0 and the highest to 1. This allows all the curves to fit on the same graph and be scored the same. But this assumes that all features are equally important, which isn't always true. For example, athletic shoe companies like Nike and its competitors have invested billions of dollars in developing super shoes designed to enhance running speed. These shoes combine cutting-edge technologies like carbon fiber plates and responsive foam to maintain stability and prevent energy loss. They're so effective that they created a huge controversy over their legality in marathons when they were introduced back in 2017. Yet despite all of this, if you put me in these billion-dollar shoes, I would still get torched by Usain Bolt in the 40, even if he was wearing Crocs. The point being that while shoes do play a factor in running speed, it's far less important than other factors such as strength and endurance. It's the same with our model. We've got several features, but how do we know which is most important? The truth is, we really don't know for sure. Some features like gym crowdedness are based on personal preferences. There's no guaranteed way to determine the perfect weights, but we can use evidence to make a solid estimate. And so here we stand at the final obstacle, the final boss before discovering our truth: finding the values of these three variables. Each will be a multiplier for the respective score, determining how much each feature impacts the final score. For our three features, circadian rhythm, caffeine timing, and gym crowdedness, I chose weights of 0.5, 0.2, and a range of 0 to 0.4, respectively. These numbers are arbitrary. The only thing that really matters is their proportion to each other. For example, we could have used 50, 20, and 0 to 40, and the results would have been the same. I chose the largest weight for circadian rhythm because it has the largest body of supporting evidence surrounding it. The fact that Olympic athletes go to such lengths to sync their circadian rhythms with their competition times speaks to it. And for good reason too, as we found out the difference could be substantial. I chose a much smaller weight for caffeine, less than half of circadian rhythms. While it's important, especially for recovery reasons, its effects wanes over time. Most studies indicate that avoiding caffeine 5 to 6 hours before bed is enough to prevent major sleep impediments. Finally, I wanted to provide a range for the gym crowdedness weight since it's a personal preference. Some people love the energy of a 6 p.m. crowd, while others hate them so much they go at 2 a.m. I wanted to account for both types of people by giving them the option to set their own weight. People who don't care about crowds at all can set it at 0, removing the factor completely. People who care about crowds a lot can set it to 0.4, allowing it to offset the circadian rhythm factor, and everyone else can just find something in between. These weights aren't perfect, and I've had quite a few debates with them with friends and family, but I'm confident enough that this setup will give us a strong estimate. And now we're ready. We have an equation that can score a specific time based on how optimal it is for lifting. We just need to go to our graph, grab the scores from each curve at a specific point, plug them into the equation, choose a weight for the crowdedness score, and then calculate our final score. Then we just need to repeat this for every single damn point on the graph to see which time has the highest final score. If you couldn't tell, this process sucks and would be extremely tedious to do manually. But don't worry, I've teased it a few times throughout this video, but in conjunction with this, I've also developed a simple web app to handle all these calculations for us. The app takes all the things that we've mentioned throughout this video, like chronotype, wake up time, day of the week, caffeine habits, and crowd preferences, and uses them as inputs to easily calculate your personal optimal gym time. It's really simple to use, and I try to design it to be as intuitive as possible, so go check it out. I'll include a link in the description. Even though we just spent all this time doing a deep dive into the science of finding the best time to lift, the real best time to work out is whenever it fits into your schedule. Whatever time gets you to go to the gym consistently is the best time to lift. I took on this project for the sake of science and because at the time I had nothing better to do, and I just wanted to share my findings in a hopefully fun and entertaining way. To sum it all up, we learned that your circadian rhythm can help pinpoint when your body is most ready for peak performance. Caffeine can boost your energy, but only if you time it right to avoid affecting your recovery. And when it comes to crowded gyms, it's really about personal preference, but steering clear of peak hours can help you stay on track without the wait. When you combine these factors, you get a clearer picture of what might be the most efficient time for you to hit the gym. And thanks everyone for sticking around and watching. I hope you found this exploration interesting and maybe even useful. I'd love to hear from you. When do you prefer to lift? And if you give the web app a try, let me know how it worked for you or if you got any feedback on the algorithm. Thanks again and have a good one.